The Paperclip Murders, Chapter 14. Just like marriage. I'd like to say that the evening got better for Filbert after he got that heavy confession off his chest. But truthfully, I wasn't a priest, and the only peace that was likely to come his way was the kind you find either at the bottom of a bottle or the floor of a tomb. And once he told me, upon my inquiry, that the wrong woman's name had been Samantha, he completely went to pieces. I had a couple of drinks with Woodchuck after that, and finally managed to pour the both of us into a cab and headed back for his office. In the cab, he juggled snoring with momentary waking sobs, which was a darn impressive feat if you ask me, and my little notebook full of confusing commentary on this case got just a little bit more confusing, and full of headless chickens. Because I was drawing headless chickens in it. It's a hobby, all right. What do you got? Woodchuck woke and requested that we drop by his office so he could check his books or something else equally boring, and I didn't care at the time, so I shrugged my consent. The cabbie dumped us out on the street in front of the offices with the big pillar and pillar sign on it. I tipped the cabbie another $5 and felt the insides of my wallet rasp together in an approximation of a hungry African child. Woodchuck, meanwhile, was stealthily turning one of those unpleasant shades of green that precede what I like to call involuntary bodily inventory, and if you can say that 5 times fast, you're a better man than I, or possibly French, because, you know, those French guys. Anyway, Woodchuck needed help up to the floor of his offices, and as it was not yet closing time for some of the late workers, we didn't need to fish his keys out of his pocket, which I lucked out on, because as soon as we passed the threshold of the door, Woodchuck dangling off of me like some superfluous spider monkey, he made a face dive for the nearest potted plant. And I could have tried to help, but right at that moment, the angel appeared. She had magically materialized just to my left, and brushed by me so quickly that our shoulders connected and I was thrown off balance, having already been reaching for Woodchuck. I couldn't see her face. Her hair shielded it as it billowed out like satin curtains, and her head was oddly tilted, almost like she was trying not to look at me. But I would recognize that sizzling walk and the slant of those shoulders anywhere. After all, I'm not one to forget art in all her blitzing glory. Her perfume lingered behind her as she left the office lobby, something that made me want to skip through a garden and fling frisbees at old men playing chess, and for a moment Woodchuck was forgotten. But then this earth and all its drudgery came back to greet me. I helped Woodchuck to a sitting position and got him a paper cup of water from the cooler, and he asked me if I would mind terribly pulling the daily staff reports on his desk. He said they'd be in a tan folder, and I nodded and left him sitting on the floor. One of the ladies I'd interviewed before, I couldn't remember her name, nodded at me as I walked past her desk, and I stopped for a moment and flashed her a grin. "Say, doll," I schmoozed, "you wouldn't by any chance know that sweet little gal who just walked out of here, would you? A name, perhaps? Blood type?" Desk lady looked up at me, quirking an eyebrow up, and shrugged her shoulders. "Her name's Alice. She works in the mail department on the bottom floor. She just comes through here to deliver things." I nodded, absently tucking a cigarette to bed in between my lips. "Well, she's a swell thing, and that's all I'm saying." I left the secretary to stare after me, probably wondering what sort of intangible, mysterious mysteries were currently bubbling about in the brains of men like myself, and walked into Woodchuck's office. The office looked like Emily Post had taken up house cleaning, and a speed habit to boot. I would have had to tax myself to find a spot that wasn't completely devoid of anything resembling clutter or dust, and there were absolutely, and I mean absolutely, no stacks of papers or files or misshapen gargoyle bookends anywhere. I was completely mystified as to how Woodchuck ever found anything in here. The tan folder was indeed on his desk, placed nice and neat dead center, and I scooped it up with a lazy hand and ouch! The contents of the folder scattered on the floor, and I frowned at my index finger, which was displaying a drop of blood welling up from a tiny prick on its surface. I pressed it to my mouth, frowning as I snapped the folder up from the floor, and saw the culprit that had shish kebabbed me, a bent paperclip that had been keeping all the papers in a neat stack inside the folder. I must have thoughtlessly snagged my finger on the end that appeared to be more jagged, and bent it when I scooped it up. I muttered a few choice phrases about myself that would have made a schoolmarm blush in her ankles, and put the rest of the papers in a semblance of orderly fashion in the folder. Then I returned to Woodchuck, tipping my hat at his secretary once more, and helped Woodchuck to his feet. We toddled out the door, back down to where the cabbie waited, and I sent Woodchuck on his way home, deciding that I would rather walk for a while. Moving your legs was always good for the thinking bits. My thoughts danced around Angel Face, and I caught myself considering ways to run into her more and abruptly shoved my hands deep into my coat pockets. Easy, man! You've got enough on your mind without chasing a skirt. And indeed, I did have a lot on my mind. There was Samantha, a faceless victim of Hennessy and Brock, who might well never be found. I feared that, in order to shut her up, they may have resorted to planting Samantha bulbs. Or perhaps they had chased her out of the state, or even used the same threats against her. Then there was Yurov and his Russian bowling team. And somewhere in the middle of all this, the clown somehow fit in. I didn't know how, but I had a hunch it would become evident all too quickly. I'd only been walking for a couple of minutes, deciding to take the stairs down from 7th Street to the Union Street platform, and that's when it happened. I took a step, and suddenly my foot just didn't respond. It was like the little man working the gears inside shot himself in the head and left the machine to its own devices. I went to put a hand out to grab the rail and steady myself, and was dismayed to find that not only was my hand stuck in the air, like a drunkard in quicksand, but that everything felt frozen. Except for the fact that my body was still moving, pitching forward like a ship determined to plow itself onto the cruel reef in front of it. And as my body tumbled face first down the stairs, I was amazed to find that I could feel every single blow, but was absolutely helpless to stop it. Just like marriage.